there is a particular kind of silence that follows a confession. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of a man who has spent decades choosing his words carefully and has finally decided to stop. Ron Howard sat down recently and spoke with the kind of honesty that cannot be rehearsed. Not the polished, press junket version of honesty, where a celebrity admits to a small flaw to seem relatable, but the raw, unguarded kind that comes when a person has lived long enough to stop protecting their own image. What he revealed in that conversation was not a single bombshell but something more unsettling, a mosaic of regret, sacrifice, grief, and near collapse that had been hidden in plain sight for 50 years, tucked behind one of the most recognizable smiles in American entertainment. The world has always known Ron Howard as a success story. Child star. Beloved television actor. Academy Award-winning director. Family man. The arc of his life reads like something Hollywood itself would have scripted, too clean, too triumphant, too neatly resolved. But the truth, as Howard now describes it, is that the clean version was always a performance, and the cost of maintaining it was higher than anyone on the outside could have imagined. He was born on March 1, 1954, in Duncan, Oklahoma, to a family that breathed the entertainment industry the way other families breathe ordinary air. His father, Rance Howard, was an actor who had built his entire adult life around the craft. His mother, Jean, had trained as an actress before marriage. By the time Ron was 18 months old, he had already appeared on film. Not because his parents were pushing him into the spotlight for financial gain, but because the world they inhabited was the world of sets and cameras and call sheets, and a toddler who lived in that world naturally ended up in front of a lens. That early start shaped everything: his instincts, his discipline, his inability to ever fully separate work from self. When the family relocated to California, it was not for the sunshine or the mythology of Hollywood dreams. It was strategic. Rance understood that proximity to production was proximity to opportunity, and he drove his family straight into the beating heart of early American television. Ron was barely school age when he was already working. And yet, by every account from those who knew them, Rance and Jean Howard were not the predatory stage parents that populate cautionary tales. They were something more complicated, deeply devoted, fiercely protective, and absolutely certain that what they were doing was right. On October 3, 1960, a 6-year-old named Ronnie Howard appeared on the first episode of The Andy Griffith Show as Opie Taylor, the motherless son of a small-town sheriff. The role would define a decade of his life and, in quieter ways, the rest of it. What Rance had demanded of the writers before production began, that the father-son relationship feel genuine rather than theatrical, set the emotional tone for the entire series. Andy Griffith honored it. The result was something American television had rarely seen: a child character who was allowed to be confused, to be wrong, to grow. Ron did not play Opie. For 8 years, in many ways, he was him. But what Ron has recently spoken about with new candor is what that golden period cost him. He used a phrase that stopped the room: a golden cage. Safe, he said. Warm. Surrounded by people who cared about him. And completely sealed. While other children in Burbank were riding bikes through neighborhoods and arguing at lunch tables, Ron was doing arithmetic in a room near Stage 40 while Grips moved equipment around him. He had a welfare worker on set as required by California law. He had his father nearby almost every day. He had Andy Griffith playing guitar at lunch and Don Knotts telling clean jokes. And he was lonely in a way that had no name because nobody around him thought loneliness was possible given everything he had. He missed ordinary childhood. He missed it in real time, knew it was passing, and could not stop it. He has said recently that this particular grief, the grief for a normal boyhood, never entirely went away. It simply went underground and reappeared in unexpected places throughout his adult life, in the obsessive perfectionism on set, in the way he threw himself into work during periods when he should have been present at home, in the collapse that would eventually come on the set of Apollo 13 and shatter the illusion that he was built differently than other people. The transition from Opie Taylor to Richie Cunningham looked, from the outside, seamless. In 1974, Ron walked into a room with producer Gary Marshall and became someone else within minutes. Happy Days ran for 11 seasons. Ron appeared in 255 episodes. It made him wealthy and famous in a different way, not the warmth of Mayberry, but the broad, demographic appeal of 1950s nostalgia repackaged for a Vietnam-era audience that desperately wanted to remember simpler times. He was good at it. He was very good at it. But by the 5th season, he was suffocating. He wrote a memo to ABC. 3 pages. He asked for Richie Cunningham to grapple with the draft, with the war, with the reality that American teenagers in the mid-1970s could not fully ignore. The network said no. Too risky. Too political. The advertisers needed comfort, not conscience. Ron accepted the compromise, a background newspaper here, a passing comment there, but the experience crystallized something that had been forming since he was a child actor watching his father fight for small dignities on other people's sets. He did not want to wait for someone else to make decisions. He wanted the camera. He wanted the cut. He wanted to be the one who decided what story got told and how. What he has only recently spoken about with full honesty is how close he came to not getting that chance at all. In 1976, when the Fonzie phenomenon was consuming the show and ABC floated the idea of renaming it to center on Henry Winkler's character, Ron stood up in a way that surprised people who thought they knew him. He gave the network 48 hours. He threatened to walk. He was willing to blow up a $500,000 contract and take the legal consequences rather than watch the thing he was part of get reshaped around someone else's fame. It was not vanity. It was the same instinct his father had passed to him, the understanding that in this industry, if you do not fight for what is true disappears. He won, partly. The name stayed. Fonzie kept the top billing. And Ron kept his seat at the table long enough to direct his first episode of the show in October 1977. The budget was thin. The shot list was dense. He rehearsed it the way a general rehearses a campaign, and he executed it in ways that saved time and money and left the crew briefly speechless. Ratings went up. ABC gave him more episodes. The director was already there, waiting inside the actor. But the transition came at a cost he did not fully account for. In 1975, at 21 years old, he had married his high school sweetheart, Cheryl Alley. The marriage has lasted 50 years, which in the mathematics of Hollywood is essentially a miracle. But Ron has been specific recently about what Cheryl has carried during those decades. The rule they made early, no work talk at dinner, was real, and it held. But rules are frameworks, not walls, and the work leaked through anyway. Not in conversation but in absence. In distraction. In the way a man can be physically present at a dinner table while his mind runs shooting schedules in a parallel universe. When their first child, Bryce Dallas Howard, was born in March 1981, Ron was on set. That is not unusual for that generation or that industry. But what he has admitted recently is that the pattern of his absence was not accidental. It was a feature of who he was, deeply built into him by a childhood in which work and love were never properly separated. He directed Bryce's school play when she was 5. He meant it as a gift. She experienced it as pressure. He did not understand the distinction until years later when she told him directly. He apologized. She forgave him. But the apology, he has said, did not undo the reality that he had spent years seeing his children through the same lens he pointed at everything else in his life, as material to be shaped toward a desired outcome. The grief over his brother Clint runs deeper still. Clint Howard, the younger son of Rance and Jean, had also grown up in the industry. He also acted. He was also shaped by the peculiar pressures of a childhood lived on set. But where Ron's trajectory bent upward, Clint's bent inward. Through the 1980s, Clint fought addiction, cocaine and alcohol, in ways that Ron only partially understood while they were happening. When the crisis became impossible to ignore around 1990, Ron told his brother the truth without softening it: get help, or lose the relationship. It was the kind of ultimatum that requires a particular kind of love, not gentle, not accommodating, but honest in the way that only someone who will not give up on you can be honest. Clint chose life. Chose recovery. They have spoken about it since in their shared memoir, and Ron has been direct about the guilt that accompanied his relief. His own success, he has said, may have made Clint's sense of failure sharper. When one sibling ascends and the other struggles, the ascent itself can become a wound. He did not intend it. He could not have prevented it. But it happened, and he has carried the awareness of it. The collapse on the set of Apollo 13 in 1995 is perhaps the most revealing episode in Howard's recent confessions, because it is the moment when the gap between the image and the man became physically undeniable. He had been working 18-hour days for 90 consecutive days. He had attended NASA briefings, supervised zero-gravity filming sequences, choreographed explosions, reviewed footage, led night rehearsals, and maintained the outward calm of a man entirely in control. On the 90th day, his body simply stopped cooperating. Dehydration. Hypertension. The set went quiet. Production halted for 36 hours. He has said recently that what shook him most in those 36 hours was not the physical crisis itself but the realization that he had not noticed it coming. He is a man trained from infancy to read situations, to anticipate, to prepare. And he had missed every signal his own body had been sending for weeks. What does it mean, he has asked, that a person can be so committed to a story on screen that he loses the thread of his own? It is a question he has not fully answered. But he has acknowledged that he answered it badly for years after Apollo 13 by simply returning to the same pace as soon as he was physically able. The failures have been real and he has spoken about them with less defensiveness than one might expect from a man of his stature. EDTV, released in 1999, was a film he made while turning down Castaway. It arrived in theaters a month after The Truman Show covered similar territory better. It lost significant money. He has said he did not see clearly enough what he was making or why. He was moving fast, as he always moved fast, and speed had obscured his judgment. Then came the long international shoot for Far and Away in 1992, 6 months in Ireland while his wife managed their household alone, while his newborn daughter Jocelyn changed in ways he missed entirely, while his older daughter Bryce developed memories of a home life that did not include him. When he returned, Bryce barely knew him in the way a small child knows the person who is supposed to be there. That particular absence, he has said, broke something open in him. He promised not to take another long international shoot. He mostly kept that promise. And then, years later, he broke it again for a project that needed him, and he missed more of what he could not get back. The death of his father, Rance Howard, on November 25, 2017, at the age of 89, arrived at the end of a year that had already taken his stepmother. Ron has spoken about this loss with a grief that is still unresolved, and perhaps will always be. Rance had appeared in dozens of Ron's films, not as a favor, not as nepotism, but because the two men had simply never stopped working in the same world, the way they had worked in the same world since Ron was a toddler learning where to stand under the lights. The person who taught him to tell the truth on camera, to be honest rather than cute, to pause and listen and respond like a human being, that person was gone. And with him went the last living witness to the version of Ron Howard that existed before the awards, before the box office numbers, before the name meant what it now means. He has spoken about the 2018 Solo, a Star Wars story experience with a frankness that surprised even longtime observers of his career. He took over that production mid-shoot, after the original directors had been removed, and he rebuilt the film largely from scratch, reshooting the majority of scenes. It still underperformed. And in its aftermath, for the first time in a career that had spanned more than 6 decades, he seriously considered whether he was done. Not retiring. Done. The word he has used is different. Finished. As in, the thing inside him that compelled him toward cameras and stories and the particular anguish of making something real, he was not sure it was still there. His daughter Bryce talked him back. Not with a speech. Not with an argument about his legacy or his body of work. Simply by being the person she is, the director she has become, the evidence that what he had tried to give her, imperfectly, at too much cost, with too many absences and one school play he should never have directed, had taken root in ways he had not entirely seen. She reminded him, by existing and working and continuing, that the story was not finished. In 2025, Ron Howard sat with his wife of 50 years and marked the anniversary with a quiet gesture, a bench donated to the high school where they first met, the ordinary place where an extraordinary life began to take shape. He made a confession that day, not on camera but to her. He still regretted the absences. All of them. The months in Ireland, the 90 days on Apollo 13, the school plays he missed and the ones he directed when he should have watched, the dinners where his body was present and his mind was elsewhere. Nancy Howard listened. The no work at dinner rule still held. It had held for 50 years. What Ron Howard has revealed in his most recent and most honest interviews is not a scandal in the conventional sense. There is no hidden crime, no public hypocrisy exposed, no dramatic unmasking. What he has revealed is something quieter and more universal, the portrait of a man who was so thoroughly shaped by his work from the very beginning of his life that he sometimes could not distinguish between living and performing, between presence and production, between love and the pursuit of something just beyond the frame. He has achieved almost everything the industry measures. More than $200 million in net worth. An Academy Award for directing. 47 Oscar nominations across Imagine Entertainment's catalog. 40 years of partnership with Brian Grazer. Films that have become part of the permanent cultural record: Splash, Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, Frost/Nixon, The Da Vinci Code. A marriage that has survived the industry's most reliable destroyer of marriages. And yet the things he speaks about with the most feeling are smaller and more private. The baby who barely knew him when he came home from Ireland. The brother he almost lost.